welcome to episode number 19 of the Jimmy Canz Show. Today, Classic Supercard Retrospective, Starrcade, 1986, The Skywalkers. So, last retrospective, I said I wasn't going to be covering the Bash because it was a full summer tour, and then mistakenly said, well, my next one up will be WrestleMania 3. I totally, blanked and forgot about Starrcade. So here we are. So let's get into it. Again, it was an NWA event promoted by Jim Crockett Promotions. And it was, again, from two locations. The Greensboro Coliseum Complex in Greensboro, North Carolina, and the Omni in Atlanta, Georgia. So same as the previous year. We had about 16,000 in North Carolina and 14,000 in attendance in Atlanta. The event was November 27th, 1986, which was Thanksgiving. And like I said, it was called the Skywalkers because they were going to have the scaffold match, which they called a Skywalker match, later that evening. The event was broadcast on closed circuit television, obviously between the two venues, as well as around the eastern U.S., and it was also later distributed on home video. I believe it was done by Turner Home Video this time. So, this was not really the event that Crockett had originally planned. They had to make some adjustments on the fly, unfortunately, due to the untimely career-ending car accident of Magnum TA. Magnum was hot at the time. He was really getting over. He had the look, especially in the 80s. He was a tough guy. He was connecting with the crowd. And they had, big plans for him to, catapult, into, the 80s and 90s and beyond, which was tragically, cut short due to his injuries, which ended his career. So, the original plan, was to have Magnum in the main event, having him recapture the United States Championship from Nikita prior to the event, but, all that didn't happen. So they had to adjust some things on the fly and change some things around. I think the plan was, for Magnum to capture that, and then Nikita go into a feud with Garvin. So obviously those things didn't happen. So instead, they turned Nikita babyface and threw Garvin into a match with Big Bubba Rogers. So let's get into the card a little bit. We bounce back and forth between North Carolina and Atlanta. Every other match this year, it's not a couple, like the previous year where we'd have, 1-1 and then 2-2 kind of thing. So we keep alternating back and forth between the two locations. And let's open the event up with a tag team matchup with the team of Tim Horner and Nelson Royal. That was right. Nelson Royal against the Kernoodle brothers, Rocky Kernoodle and Don Kernoodle. So, not much to talk about in this one. This was a makeshift tag team in Horner and Royal, which made absolutely no sense as to why the makeshift tag team of Horner and Nelson Royal go over in this one. It was about a 7.5 minute match, and it was won with nothing more than a roll-up. So, not too much to discuss in that one. Pretty lackluster match. So we head over to Atlanta. And we get the matchup of Brad Armstrong against gorgeous Jimmy Garvin with Precious in his corner. So obviously we don't get it in the versions available now, but if you were fortunate enough to see an original release of this, you get Garvin's entrance to ZZ Top's Sharp Dressed Man. It was perfect for his character at the time, and it's sad not seeing it anymore. With the dubbed over music that's in the available viewings of it now, it really takes away from it. But this was it was a really good match, and it went to a full 15-minute time limit draw. So they had, Garvin was really over as a heel, and at the time I think they had some plans for Armstrong, so they didn't want, either one of them to have to do the job in this one, so they just had him, go to the full time limit draw. So now we head back to North Carolina, and we get another tag team matchup. This one is, Hector Guerrero and Baron von Raschke taking on the team of Shuska Watley and the Barbarian. Watley and Barbarian were part of Paul Jones's group. Paul Jones was not out with them for this matchup. Not sure exactly why. But, Guerrero, had heat with Paul Jones's group because of Manny Fernandez turning and siding with Paul Jones and his group. So this one, was kind of almost a rinse and repeat a little bit of the previous tag match. So this is our second match in North Carolina, and it's our second tag match, and it's also about 7.5 minutes long. So I feel a little bit bad for the North Carolina crowd at this point. They're, kind of getting rinse and repeats and everything. The ending of this one was really awkward. With Guerrero spitting in Watley's face, that kind of stuns him and allows him to get the tag to Raschke, and Baron von Raschke comes in and starts goose stepping around the ring. It's cringeworthy to watch nowadays. I think it was probably not very well received even at the time, but you just probably didn't have the outstretch and the sounding boards as readily available than as you do now. We're in the 80s, so we're about 40 years removed from the Second World War, but still to see somebody goose stepping around the ring, especially to be portrayed as a baby face doing that, just didn't make a lot of sense to me. But he ends up getting the claw and getting the win, and for the team of Guerrero and Arashi, but it just didn't go over well for me, in my opinion. I just didn't like it. So back to Atlanta we go for our fourth match of the evening, and this is another tag team match. So we are now 4 matches in, and this is our third tag team match. So not a lot of creativity from the booking committee in this one in terms of how they arranged the matches. This one was a United States Tag Team Championship matchup. It had no disqualification stipulation on it. And it saw the champions of the Russians defending against the team of the Kansas Jayhawks. And the Kansas Jayhawks consisted of Bobby Jaggers and Dirty Dutch Mantel. And obviously the Russians were the Russian Bear Ivan Koloff and Crusher Khrushchev. So why anybody would agree to a no DQ matchup against the Russians is kind of beyond me. I mean, they didn't hesitate to get DQ'd and utilize the chain every stretch of the way. So why you would give them free reign to do it and not get penalized for it didn't make a lot of sense to me. And obviously, the Russians, use every dirty trick in the book and not get penalized for it and end up getting W and retaining their titles. So, whatever. It just didn't make a lot of sense to me. So, let's head back over to North Carolina. And we get a Indian strap match between Chief Wahoo McDaniel and Ravishing Rick Rude with Paul Jones. So, I don't quite understand why, Jones would come out with Rude, but he didn't come out with Watley or Barbarian. Didn't make a lot of sense to me, but what are you going to do? Wahoo was, past his prime. Wasn't the same as he used to be. And then thankfully he was in there with Rude, who was in his prime and could work amazingly. Rude, obviously, being the young up and comer, but if this is a Indian strap match, so obviously, the way that their minds worked back then is, Wahoo, would need to get the W in this one. So that's exactly what happened. Next, we head back to Georgia, and we have another championship matchup. This one for the NWA Central States Heavyweight Championship. Champion Sam Houston defending against superstar Bill Dundee. Pretty decent match. They gave him time to work in this one, about 10.5 minutes or so, I think, before Dundee gets himself disqualified, allowing Houston to retain his title, but also, allowing Dundee to keep his heat. So now we go back to Georgia, and we have the hair versus hair match between Paul Jones and the Boogie Woogie Man, Jimmy Valiant, with Big Mama in his corner. Paul Jones was seconded by Manny Fernandez, but there was a stipulation. Manny was locked in a cage, so he couldn't interfere. And it was hair versus hair, but it wasn't Valiant's hair on the line. It was Big Mama's hair on the line because Valiant had already had his hair cut. And, this is really the final time that we're going to have to talk about Jimmy Valiant versus Paul Jones. I think, things lasted a little bit longer, but I don't think we get any more matchups between the two on any super cards after this. This was kind of the final big blow-off. It was only about 4 minutes or so long. Valiant, picked up the W so they could, cut Paul Jones's hair and, finally, put a bow on this 4-long year feud. I will say, though, that the crowd was just really into this, even though it was only 4 minutes long. The explosion after Valiant got the win was pretty impressive. So, match number 8, we head back to Atlanta, and we get the street fight, Louisville street fight, I think they referred to it as, with Big Rubber Rogers, accompanied by James E. Cornet, against Ron Garvin. And this was a pretty good match. I mean, Big Bubba was still, pretty green at this point in time, but, he could still bump and go pretty well. They went almost a full 12 minutes in this match before, Bubba, finally got the win over Garvin. So it's kind of funny, to think, that they had plans of having, Garvin in the U.S. title picture and or world title picture, around this time frame, and now they are having him, go down to a very young, green, inexperienced Big Bubba. So we head back to North Carolina now for a first blood match for the NWA World Television Championship with Tully Blanchard representing the Horsemen, with James J. Dillon in his corner, taking on champion the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes. So some great psychology in this one. It wasn't an incredibly long match by, the standards that you normally see in Crockett, especially for title matches. But they did a great job telling a story here. I mean, the pre-match shenanigans between with Dillon and Blanchard, where they're trying to put wrestling headgear on him to protect him, from potentially bleeding, and Vaseline to potentially, protect him from bleeding, which the referee's, stopping him at every turn kind of thing, was great. Only for Dillon to get frustrated and go over and start yelling at Rhodes, to which Rhodes, winds up and just clocks Dillon with his big bionic elbow, and it busts Dillon wide open. So without, they did a job of telling the story, before the match even starts, that, Dusty's elbow, that can bust you open one shot, kind of thing. So it was great. Great little bit of psychology and storytelling right there. And then, Dusty does end up, busting open Tully. But the referee was knocked for a loop before that happened. So obviously the referee doesn't see it, and this allows, Blanchard to get over to Dillon and them to stem the flow of blood a little bit, and get the Vaseline on him, and, and then he passes Tully the infamous roll of coins, and then, he gets back in there with Dusty and everything, and he's able to bust Dusty open with a big shot from the loaded roll of coins. And Dusty goes down in a heap right next to the official, who kind of opens his eyes and sees Dusty laying there bleeding and immediately calls for the bell. To which Dusty, goes berserk, because he just lost the title, pointing out, hey, look, he's bleeding, can't you see the coins and everything, and he was bleeding first, and yada yada, but the official's like, hey, all I saw was you bleed. When I opened my eyes, I called the match, kind of thing. So, that was, pretty well done. I liked it. Now we head over to Atlanta again for the Skywalker Scaffold match with the Road Warriors, Hawk and Animal, and their manager, Precious Paul Ellering, taking on the team of the Midnight Express, which was Beautiful Bobby Eaton and Loverboy Dennis Condrey, and they were accompanied by James E. Cornet and Big Bubba Rogers. So, I don't know how familiar people are with the Scaffold match, but let's, be totally transparent and upfront here. If you've seen one Scaffold match, you've seen them all, because there's not a lot you can do up there. Obviously, it's very dangerous type of thing. One misstep and you could really get hurt, type of thing. So, and you can't do a lot of moves up there. Obviously, you can't do any type of high spots or anything like that with the risk of falling. So it's basically just a punch and kick affair up there. And that's pretty much what we saw. Every Scaffold match, pretty much ended the same way, with the combatants, somehow ending up underneath the scaffold. This is to kind of mitigate, the drop and everything, swinging back and forth with kicks, until one kicks the other one down, to the thing. And that's exactly what happens here with the Road Warriors getting, getting the W and knocking the Express, down to the ring. And then, post match, we get the infamous spot of Cornet running from Ellering up the scaffold to only be cornered by the Road Warriors, and then trying to escape, dropping underneath the scaffold and dropping down to the ring and blowing out his every ligament in his knee. The spot he was supposed to be caught by Bubba, but he missed his cue, and Cornet hit and just totally blew out his knee. Legit. So, I mean, if you were a fan of wrestling in the 80s and 90s and everything, you saw footage of that drop for years to come after it happened. So now we head back to Carolina for their main event, which was the steel cage match for the NWA World Tag Team Championships, with the champions of the Rock and Roll Express, Ricky Morton, Robert Gibson, taking on the team of the Minnesota Wrecking Crew, Ole and Arn Anderson, and also representing the Horsemen. This was a phenomenal tag team matchup. This match went over 20 minutes long and had drama and just ring psychology. And, if you are a fan of tag team wrestling and you want to see good tag team wrestling, I recommend you put this match on. It's phenomenal. But, the Express is able to escape with the win in this one. Ricky gets dominated for most of this. Robert finally has enough, jumps in, house on fire kind of thing, and then they end up on a spot with Ole where he, takes a shot and goes down hard and, really knocks his head, dazing him just long enough to allow the Express to pick up the 3 count. And then the Andersons, live it after losing, start, beating down the Express post-match until they finally literally, escape the cage with their belts in their lives kind of thing. But, just great storytelling, great ring work. I highly recommend this match. Now we head back to Atlanta for the main event of the whole show, and that was the world title match with champion, the Nature Boy himself, Ric Flair, taking on United States champion, the Russian Nightmare, Nikita Koloff. So, like I said, this was not the original plan. The original plan was Magnum TA in the spot, but unfortunately, due to his career-ending injury, they had to pull an audible, and Nikita was the plan. Impromptu babyface turn, and so-and-so match in this one, in my opinion, really. What can you say about matches that end in double DQs, which is exactly what happened in this one. I think a lot of it had to do with Nikita being thrust into this position really before he was ready. Like I said, he was still pretty green in the business. And also, he'd only ever really worked as a heel. So you work differently as a heel than as a babyface. So now he's thrust into this, in the spotlight here, and he really doesn't know how to work the match. So, it was all right. But that was, Starrcade 86. I think there were hit and misses on this show. I think, the North Carolina crowd, they got gypped on some of things. But got bailed out in the fact that they got the cage match and the first blood match, which were really well done. And then the Atlanta crowd, they got the spectacle of the Skywalker match, but it wasn't really that good of a match. A lackluster world title match, and everything. Like I said, I think you can kind of see the wheels starting to come off the bus a little bit here for Jim Crockett Promotions. As they're not going to be long for the business here. Like I said, this is now what? November of '86. Only got maybe about 2 more years left in their lifespan. So that was the show in terms of ratings. For the tag team championship match, the first blood match, they kind of saved this one a little bit. I will say this is a 3 out of 10. So I believe next up for the show here will be the NXT in your house takeover in your house predictions. Hope to have Rodney join me on that one. So give the channel a like, share, subscribe. Stay safe out there, and I will see you when I see you.